All right. Hello, everyone, and good evening to everyone who is joining us tonight. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Ishan Chabe, and I am the founder of the Global Social Enhancement Corporation. It is my honor and privilege to welcome you all and host this webinar event on mental health wellness. This event in particular commemorates our first event within the Global Social Enhancement Health Services Division, which aims to empower underprivileged populations across the globe through the provision of meaningful insights and widely accessible resources in the public health space. For our webinar event tonight, we are joined today by two highly accomplished and distinguished professionals within the mental health wellness space, Professor Allison Hilbin and Professor Lauren Mitchell. Professor Hilbin is not only a newly accredited mental health counselor intern, but she also serves as a senior lecturer in the Department of Biological Sciences at Vanderbilt University, teaching courses such as statistical methods for biology, anatomy and physiology, cell biology lab, and collective intelligence. Alongside Professor Hilbin, we have Professor Mitchell, who, among several notable accomplishments, is also serving as a direct care practitioner in the psychiatric ward at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and she is also a senior lecturer in the Department of Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University, teaching courses such as Health Humanities, Mass Hysteria, and Reproductive Justice and Narrative. In addition to our two mental health professionals, we are also joined by a student speaker, Isabel Naku, who is a fall 2024 alum from Boston College, and she is also the acting director of the GSE Health Services program. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and I look forward to having a meaningful conversation with all of you as we get started with our webinar. So as I start with our first question, I just want to kind of start off with, what does mental health mean for you? And you guys can go in any order.
So for me, I feel like, sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, you go.
So similar to physical health, when you wake up in the morning and you feel like you have strong physical health, you know that whatever it is that you have the goal of to do during that day, you're able to accomplish that. And I feel like with mental health, that's the same thing. Do you have motivation to do the things that you feel like you're given the ability to do? Do you feel like you have the motivation to accomplish that which would enhance your life, that which would enhance those that you love, and it would give you the ability to look forward into the future, to enjoy yourself within your skin, to think positively about yourself, to be able to make the impact that you feel like you want to make on the world, and to be able to sit in a field and enjoy the feeling of watching the sunlight cascade upon the leaves and feel like you're able to enjoy just the general sensations of being alive.
Professor Mitchell?
That's such a, I'm like, oh, I was hoping and I was like, that's great. But I guess I'll just add to everything that all the wise things that Professor Hilbin just said. Part of the way that I approach it, and at this point in time in my non-academic life, I'm working in acute care inpatient psychiatry. So I'm working with folks who are quite definitively not having their best day. And one of the ways that that's helped me reframe what mental health is or means is also that it's thinking about coping, distress tolerance, and working with what you got in order to be able to tolerate, perhaps even enjoy your life as much as you can, right? You can't help, right, the genetic bag of rocks you might have gotten. You can't help if you've experienced trauma at some point in your life. These things are out of any individual's control, right? But it is your problem to deal with. It is each individual's problem to deal with. So how to figure out how to work with what you have and massage it into the broader narrative of the rest of your life to enjoy Professor Hilbin's field, and, you know, in order to cope with other things that you might get that might be unexpected, or things that might be challenges, in addition to, you know, just making sure you can't help what your initial reaction is to stuff sometimes, but you can help some of the behavior that comes along with it. You can have your coping mechanisms of like, hey, if you have low distress tolerance, or if you know that you might get bothered by certain things, that's okay. Self-compassion and forgiveness is important. Just figure out what you need to do in order to be able to get yourself back in alignment, to go back in and have a conversation with someone, or, you know, to be able to keep on keeping on.
Yeah, I think that Professor Hilbin and Professor Mitchell really hit the nail on the head with this question. To add on to both of their points, I think that it's really important to also acknowledge that mental health is kind of like this, something that can get stuck in this ongoing cycle. And it's also something that we think a lot when we talk about mental health, about care of the whole person, and, you know, thinking about a patient or a person holistically. And I think what's important to think about that is that there's also a bidirectional relationship sometimes between physical and mental health, and how sometimes when mental health isn't, you know, going great, that can start to affect physical health, where those days where someone might be feeling low could not only affect their happiness and general will to live, but also just daily things like getting up out of bed, brushing your teeth, taking a shower, that can really affect your physical health in ways that many people don't think about.
All right. No, those were all very meaningful insights. And I think y'all really did do a great job in covering this idea, at least in regards to your own respective fields. So my next question really is, sorry about all these disturbances here. So my next question really is more towards Professor Hilbin and Professor Mitchell. So like, when it comes to your own respective fields, what really made you gravitate towards mental health? And specifically, you're welcome to share as much or as little as you'd like.
We'll do like I'll jump in.
We can do the opposite.
So I've been working in direct care for, and actually, interestingly, in medical education for, it feels scary to say, but like nearly 50% of my life at this point. You know, I started off when I was Ishan and Isabel, your age, when I was working as what's called a standardized patient, which is basically an actor given a script of a certain kind of illness, and you interact with medical students to help teach them how to have social skills. And from there, so I've always been really involved in, you know, not necessarily wanting or feeling like it would be the best fit for me to be an MD doctor myself, but really feeling very passionately about patient advocacy and care. I trained as a doula when I was 21, and shortly thereafter started an organization called the Doula Project, which is the country's first full spectrum doula organization. That was, we might not have been the first ones doing it, but we formalized the organization. And I share all of this to say, and for those who don't know, a doula is somebody who is typically around during birth and death. It's a non-medical but medical adjacent support person who provides emotional, informational, and physical support during these transitional times. So what the Doula Project did was that we opened the doula model of care to also include people who were going through the range of pregnancy decision-making options, whether they were terminating a pregnancy, whether they were enduring stillbirth, miscarriage, or perinatal loss, whether they had made an adoption plan, or whether they had chosen to parent, but just couldn't otherwise afford the $2,000 it was to have a doula privately. So I got involved in this from the time I was 21. And it was really meaningful, impactful work. I got involved in narrative medicine as a discipline, and did my master's in that process. and did what ended up having happen to me, what happens to a lot of people, which is I got burnt out, just to name it. I was burnt out. I felt I had the hubris of a lot of folks where I kind of went in feeling like I was built for this. I was made for this. That I had a font of just compassion. And in many ways that held true, but working within a system of medicine and bearing witness to, like, my specialty became stillbirth. So bearing witness to that, I don't know if I had good coping mechanism architecture to support me in doing that. I was just going. I also had a project that was really meaningful to me, and so I defected to academia. I actually got a PhD in English with a focus on medical humanities. Thought I was going to be full-on academic, and started working at a medical school and realized that that I didn't feel my full self without direct care. So decided that rather than trying to forge another path, like by being a doula, and there are a lot of amazing doulas out in the world now, so I didn't feel like I've been mentoring other doulas, but I haven't needed to feel as involved in that world at this time. Also, abortion's not legal in Tennessee right now, so complicates the full spectrum side of things. And wanted to have a little bit more legitimacy in a clinical space, so ended up getting the MSW and finding a real passion for folks who are in the acute mental health care space. And I also love connecting the humanities to this practical side of it. Like, I lean my reading skills and close listening skills all the time. I'm very invested in story and the way that it's shaped and structured and the discoveries that people make about themselves too. So these two sides of my life enrich each other very deeply. So I don't mean to ramble on. I'm going to pass the mic to Professor Hilbin to share her story about that. But that's a little bit, it was a circuitous path, but I got here.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful, really exciting to hear. So my path toward being in the therapy field was basically suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder growing up. So I started having symptoms of that when I was about 8 years old, and it would sometimes be like hypochondriasis related, and sometimes it would be kind of like existential obsessions. So I was always like really concerned about things that like people think about every once in a while, such as, what if I'm stuck in a dream? Like, how do I know anything about this reality? What is the nature of like existence and consciousness? But I was 8 years old and I wasn't able to really articulate the things that were bothering me. And it would be so bad. I would be curled up on the floor crying, just not able to handle the obsessions that were in my mind. And I told myself one day, like, if I'm ever able to get through this, then I wanted to help other people. I want to be able to be like a guide for people who are struggling with deep levels of, whether it be anxiety or depression or obsessive compulsive disorder or other disorders. I thought that it would be the most valiant thing that I could do with my life. And I also really love teaching. As a kid, I used to have people come over and would ask them to do tests and to grade their tests. And I used to love that. I used to think like, this is the greatest thing in the world. And I want to teach. So after I got my undergraduate degree in physics, I decided to teach full-time before going to graduate school. I was really terrible at it, to be honest, because I had poor classroom management skills, I suppose. And at Vanderbilt, it's not like people heckle you because they want you to give them a good grade. They want to get into medical school. So it's like, okay, so even if they don't like your class, they're going to probably be attuned, you know. But in this school, it was like middle school and high schoolers, private school. Some people loathed algebra, which is what I taught. And what I noticed is that some individuals really hated math because they really didn't have a strong sense of self-worth. And it seems like it doesn't go along with like mathematics in general, but it seemed to be that case for me. People would come in during like lunch hour and everything, and they would tell me about how their parents were so disappointed with them and they didn't feel like they were going to be able to succeed in this field. And I just felt like, wow, everything is like built upon this foundation of knowledge of who you are and of the belief that you can and will succeed. And I'm not going to be able to impart anything as an educator if I can't understand that concept. So I felt like at that point, like that sparked something in me. Like I want to go get a PhD just because I feel like that's like something that, you know, it sounds so like pretentious, but I was like, I really want to be able to be called doctor. I think that would be a really fabulous thing in life. And that's one of the reasons that I got my PhD. And I had thought about going into medical school and doing psychiatry or something, but for whatever reason, I decided I'm going to go into biomedical science, but I want to afterward do something in the mental health field. Talking to students at Vanderbilt, there have been so many situations with really deep psychological issues where students are coming in to talk about, I mean, really heavy things, or suicide attempts, for instance. And it's not like I'll ever be a therapist to my students, but I always like yearn to be able to help people who are struggling with that, because I felt like, you know, after my class is over, it's not like the students are going to remember most of what I teach. Like I hope that they will, but like it's something that dissipates after your class is over. But what they should remember is how much they're cared for, how much meaning they had in my life. And if I couldn't impart that, then I feel like I failed as a professor. And then that caused me to think like, yeah, like I want to be able to do that as the goal in a field, as opposed to like only having that as like the side of what I'm doing. So I decided to embark upon the journey to get a clinical mental health counseling degree. And so here I am, very excited.
That was all, like, I have to say, like, hearing your stories and how you entered this arena is genuinely quite inspiring and powerful. So thank you both for sharing. And kind of moving that sort of line of thought to our student panelist here, Isabel. Like for you, like how has mental health, like from your perspective, like how has mental health impacted your own studies and relationships, and like how have you coped with these impacts?
Yeah, definitely. So, I was raised, both my parents are Middle Eastern, they're immigrants from Iran, and something in our culture that's definitely not, you know, super accepted or that they didn't really have a lot of familiarity with was, you know, the concept of mental health and mental health struggles. I think definitely, you know, like the COVID pandemic hitting during the end of my junior year of high school was definitely something that shifted the trajectory of how things may have gone, but that's okay. I think that, you know, it kind of guided me down a different path than I was anticipating throughout my college life. I think that the readjustment after COVID definitely made it difficult throughout schooling. So, like Professor Hilbin, I also have OCD and have had it since I was in elementary school, and it would start from when, you know, my mom would, you know, decide to clean up my room and put things in a different like arrangement than I enjoyed them to be, and I would just break down crying and tear my room apart, and I'd have to piece it back together in a way that I was comfortable and that it was the way that I needed it, and just so many other things, thinking that, you know, if I didn't say something or check on my parents every night or tell them I love you, that they were going to die in their sleep. It was just constant thoughts that would stress me out. And then getting to college was difficult, not having family or other people around, and really feeling like I was lacking a support system around me. Because in the past, it was fine because I could go talk to my family or I could talk to my friends at home who I was okay with. But being at school, especially Boston College, most students will typically say that it's definitely a cliquier school, just because we're very small. And the second half of my freshman year, I ended up talking to my parents and telling them, you know, I really think that seeing a therapist or getting mental health treatment is something that would benefit me throughout the rest of my time in college. And it really showed. That one semester I was way too scared to say anything to anyone, and the stigma of mental health was still pretty strong on college campuses, and I felt like a lot of people weren't talking about it. But as the years went on and I felt more comfortable and I went to my parents and talked about it, I noticed that more and more people around me were also starting to speak up about their own mental health struggles and how they've been able to engage either through group therapy sessions that are directly tailored to a traumatic event that they may have gone through, or individual therapy sessions, or even just making use of resources at Boston College that were meant for students who, even if they didn't want to pursue long-term mental health care, maybe just a one-time check-in and just knowing that they have that resource on hand. So I think that that's something that was really helpful throughout my time in college personally. And I think that a lot of universities now stepping it up and putting a lot of funding and emphasis on their mental health programs, especially now that, mental health struggles are very, very prominent in Gen Z and many college students today. So seeing that become more of an emphasis and seeing mental health become more and more destigmatized as the years go on is definitely something that's encouraging to see.
No. Yeah, and I will also say, I know I didn't give any background on this webinar, but I also recently graduated from Vanderbilt, so I can also attest to the fact that there has been much more accessibility to mental health resources over these last few years. And I think it's very important that we have resources such as the University Care Center, like the UCC, or student care in general. I think it's a very important component to every college, specific, as Isabel mentioned, that feeling of loneliness, leaving family for the first time is definitely something that it does affect a lot of new college students, and I think it's definitely something that we should, and I think it's a very great direction that we're headed. That's just my own personal spin as a former student. But kind of moving on from there, we've heard a few perspectives, at least from the students and from yourselves, but from your own, and this is now again going back to Professor Hilbin and Professor Mitchell, from your own experiences with regard as care providers or professors, what are some of the conditions or afflictions that you've seen in mental health that you that have been most commonly seen during your experiences, whether in the clinical setting or in the academic setting?
Thank you. So I worked in the University Counseling Center, and most of the issues that we saw there were adjustment type of disorders. There were some issues with homesickness and trying to adjust to the college environment, friendship issues, and needing strategies for social interactions. And there was also a lot of obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety and depression, which would range from mild to pretty severe. And I worked at a mental health cooperative as well, and those disorders were more like acute psychotic episodes. So people with potential schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and there were, I probably diagnosable personality disorders and that sort of thing there. And I would say that with students, I'm not diagnosing my students and everything, but I know that we went to the University Counseling Center events. They would talk about the high percentage of individuals who would meet diagnostic criteria for depression and anxiety. And I would say that so many students are struggling with at least situational anxiety. And that's the most common thing that I see with students is not necessarily anxiety that occurs during periods of rest or breaks and everything, but just this overwhelming feeling of inability to, handle the stress of academics and friends and all that together. It just becomes this massive weight on people's shoulders. It's what I normally see with students.
Yeah. I have sort of from a mental health standpoint, I think, Professor Hilbin, let's see, those patients with schizoaffective and psychotic schizophrenia spectrum disorders, I'm them's my people right now. Mm-hmm. But, so again, on the inpatient psych unit, which is a large one, we have 4 different units and 2 non-inpatient but intensive programs. So the units, and I'm just going to offer this to anybody who's listening who might be curious to know how these things kind of shake out. Not every inpatient facility is going to be able to separate patients based on what their primary issues are, but a lot of them do. So it's helpful to know. So we have a unit with what we call thought disorders. Those are folks who are struggling with psychosis in some way, shape, or form. As a footnote, working on that unit has really just been important for me and understanding first of all, it's a shockingly jovial unit. Like, people aren't always at their most functional, but you see very little suicidal ideation there. Some, but not too much. But it's just like, people will constantly say, aren't you afraid? And I too had stereotypes that I didn't even know I had about people with thought disorder until I started working on that unit. And I'm so grateful for this experience because it's a very stigmatized patient population. Like when we're talking about gun policy laws, the first people who get targeted are people with thought disorders. And I'm like, I don't know, target everybody with gun policy laws, but I digress. First of all, when we're talking about mental health issues that are frightening, thought disorders usually rise to the top, and it's really a lot to do with stigma, right? And not to do, like, of the patient populations, they are the most vulnerable and the most likely to get hurt, not the most likely to hurt others. Just to put that out there. So we have a thought disorder unit. We have a mood disorder unit that's voluntary. So that's, people need to just regroup for a couple of days inpatient. It's a safe and stable place to do that. We have a co-occurring substance use and mood disorder unit. So some people are dealing with mood disorders. Some people are also detoxing and aiming to go into substance use recovery. We have a geriatric unit, and then we also have a child and adolescent unit. It is not uncommon for students. I haven't seen any of my current students, but it's not uncommon for, Vanderbilt students to end up utilizing Vanderbilt's inpatient psychiatric services. It makes a lot of sense. My policy that I sort of share as a heads up to students in class is that I hope that they don't have occasion to have to ever come inpatient, but if they do, I will sort of act as if I don't know them until the student initiates contact, and then we can talk. And if they want to just keep everything separate, no problem, that I have professional standards to uphold and that I'm HIPAA compliant, right? So that there won't be any cross-contamination. But I also feel like it's, not judgmental about it, right? So I think that's sort of the space that I also try to impart. Now with students in terms of issues, and I think just a lot of humanities professors and creative writing professors will talk about how, because it's a more heart forward space, even, Professor Hilbin, I appreciate your story where you're just like, well, people have a lot of self-worth issues when it comes to math. So I think I should figure out how to say some thoughtful things back, like I feel like that vibe too in my sphere, where it's like people come with these really poignant issues. And I'm early in my training yet. I'm licensed, but I'm very keenly aware of the fact that it's easy. I'm still working out the boundaries of not applying one field to the other. And I would caution any early career professional to have that mindfulness of just like, my students aren't my therapy clients, right? And so trying to keep up some clear boundaries around that, even though our conversations might be therapeutic, is also kind of an interesting thing. What I often find students come in with are just like, it's Vanderbilt, right? I mean, and I say that to Isabel and Ishan, just in hearing some of what you discussed, Isabel, about the clickiness, and what we see of a lot at Vanderbilt is just like students can be extremely, extremely competitive, and they're all really high achieving. And so for folks who feel like they're still working out what they want out of this life, they can feel very intimidated. It's a lot of anxiety. And the way that I manage that in a classroom is to just have a lot of releases for the pressure valves, at least in the class that I can control. You need to submit something late, usually not a big deal, sometimes annoying, right? Like, you want to be self-reflective in an assignment, we can make space for that within reason, right? I still try to uphold intellectually rigorous standards, but at the same time, it's like, you know, you need to submit a paper 24 hours late, no problem. I'm not going to grade all 24 of them in one sitting. Makes no difference to me. So I try to encourage students to not catastrophize whenever possible, because I find that students tend to, every issue has the potential to become aggrandized when you're anxious. And Vanderbilt students have baseline high anxiety. So with that tends to come a lot of just catastrophizing, worst case scenario. Oh my God, I got a B- in this really hard class. Whatever shall I do? And it's just sort of like there's a life beyond all of that. And so to not over magnify.
Thank you so much for your answers, and they've definitely been very insightful when it comes to this idea and kind of building onto this idea. Like, from all these afflictions that we've discussed, do you believe that there is a component in a care plan that could improve the lives of those who are suffering? So in other words, like, is there any one thing that you would recommend for anyone who is suffering from any particular mental health affliction? Just kind of building off of the last question.
I definitely think that therapy is something that would be beneficial for everyone. And I think that a lot of people think that they should just go to therapy if they're having an acute crisis. And I think that it's something that a lot of people can benefit from with, regard to just like developing better coping skills and for situational disturbances. A lot of people tell themselves like, well, I don't have a mental illness, so I don't need to go get therapy. Or I'll go get therapy and then like, it'll just be something that I'll try out once. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll just move on. And I would say that every individual person should at least like, I say should, like, everyone can make their decision, but I think it'd be really helpful if everyone did that. And the strongest predictor of success, if you will, in therapy is, of course, how well you bond with the therapist. So if you feel like that person actually gets you, then that's the most important thing, interestingly, beyond like what that therapist strategy is. It was really interesting. There was a paper on anatomy and physiology instruction, and it said basically the same thing, that, beyond just regular classroom strategies, the students who did best in the class were actually the ones who felt like the teacher, the professor got them. So that is just one of the most powerful things, is finding somebody, whether it be a therapist or somebody else who you feel like you really connect with, because that social interaction, I think, is pivotal for people to, regardless of the degree of suffering, whether it's mild depression or if it's like extreme suicidal ideation, if you have those social connections and you feel like you're supported, I feel like that really ameliorates symptoms. And I feel as though something that's really helpful for people is, it seems really simple, but having something to look forward to. If you have something in your life that you can pinpoint as something that you're really excited to get to, then it tends to prolong life. It tends to make you feel like you're worth something. It makes you feel like you want to keep going. So for that, specifically like depressive type of feelings, I think that finding anything at all and having someone help you find something even that is like forward looking can actually like be really helpful for you.
Isabel, did you have a comment? I don't want to put you on the spot.
I mean, I definitely agree with Professor Hilbin's comments here. I think that therapy is very, very, very important, and I think that it's very, in some cases, is overlooked. And I think that, medication is definitely helpful, and it's something that's very necessary for some people. But I think that medication alongside supplemented with therapy is so important. And especially the point that Professor Hilpin made about having a therapist that gets you, or having a good relationship with your therapist, is very important. And speaking from experience, during my time at BC, our counseling services office was very busy. So trying to get in with someone was always a struggle. But finally, my junior year, I found someone where it felt like I had all these little things going on in my life. And it wasn't anything where, you know, I had this big feeling of not feeling great or whatever it may have been. It was just a ton of little things that I wish I could have talked to someone about, but I didn't have anyone in my life that I felt like I could go to without that slight fear of judgment or that fear of someone might hear about what I'm telling this person. So knowing that I had someone to go to who understood me, who understood the way that I spoke and the way that I was as a person, and made me feel comfortable enough to open up about things that I was scared to open up to my closest friends about, really made all the difference with my own journey with my mental health.
So I'll offer a couple of just sort of brass tacks things that might be helpful for folks while you're finding the therapist. Because I agree, and I really appreciate what you both said about how, you know, it really is about that connection. And that therapeutic relationship can be really important. And it's so intimidating to make that first phone call to say, I need help. There's such a surrender in that. Couple of things that I find myself reminding people of on a regular basis, whether they be students or clients, is that your limbic system processes big success. Your reward system processes big success and small success in the same way. You have a more nuanced part of your brain that can tell the difference and can triage, but like the parts of your baseline nervous system that can get activated when you're really upset can't tell the difference between whether you've won the lottery or done the dishes. So this is to say, the powerful part comes in where you narrativize for yourself what success means. And if you, for folks like many of us who are prone to saying, I get to call it a success when I've won the big thing or done the big thing or graduated college or got X award, that's cool. But especially if you're struggling, everything deserves a high five. And part of that comes from within, right? So if you need to build a little bit of a support system, a cognitive support system, right? That's why, I mean, it's basic, but that's why doing lists, writing the list on the list, you can already cross one off, right? You're giving yourself a way of sort of supporting your general reward system. And I find that really humbling because it's like giving yourself lots of small victories instead of one big one is super important. Another thing that I encourage people to do a lot, and I also do this, I am not a saint when it comes to this. I am one of the worst culprits. Hold yourself accountable when you catastrophize. People do it a lot, right? Myself included, where you think of the absolute worst case scenario. And it's easy to kind of let yourself spiral. I think there are a lot of us who sometimes get attached to being melancholy in the same way that pushing on a black and blue mark feels kind of good and weird, but also hurts, right? People just feel kind of compelled sometimes to keep the dark things going. And, you know, it's not a shaming thing at all. This isn't a shouldn't, but just that hold yourself accountable when you start to spiral. Even if the only thing you say is, I'm spiraling right now. That's all you need to do. Even if you keep like noticing it happening, just sort of having that moment of being like, this is a spiral. And that's what's happening right now. None of my anxieties have happened yet. And I am projecting into the future. And that is a cognitive distortion. And as you get in the habit of maintaining that accountability to yourself, it can just help support overall coping and wellness. Nothing's going to be the magic ticket on its own, but these are just little things that everybody can do on a day-to-day.
Oh, yeah, no, I think those insights and tips are very helpful to our audience members here. And I just wanted to, this is actually kind of, I was also looking at a few of our audience questions while we've been talking. So I just wanted to also mention that we also have a few listeners, and this is going to be phrased into a question, and this is mainly towards Professor Hilbin and Professor Mitchell. So we do have a few listeners who are on our who've joined us today who are currently in mental illness rehabilitation centers, and also there are a few other listeners who are also in a few substance abuse recovery centers. So one question that everyone has, like, they've been asking is, like, what would be your message to them and to young adults who might fall susceptible to certain maladaptive coping behaviors that they use to try to combat their poor mental health?
Well, the first thing that I want to say is congratulations to you folks who are in recovery, whether it's mental health or substance use. Like, that's awesome. You are getting some help. You're cracking through the creme brulee crust. It's very vulnerable, and you're doing hard work. And that in and of itself is something to be extremely proud of. So I'm going to I'll keep it quick, but just like every day that you're not leaning back into the maladaptive coping mechanisms is a victory. And if at some point you falter, that's okay. You start another day, but that there is no shame in receiving help and support. There's no shame in putting in the hard work. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to work. It's hard. Looking at yourself, especially for the substance use folks, like, there's a lot of self-examination in there that can be really intimidating. So find your group. If you're dealing with substance, go to meetings when you get out. Even if you don't want to go to meetings, it doesn't matter if you don't want to go to meetings, go to the meetings, right? But folks in either recovery side know that from the outset, you're badass, that you're doing the thing, and that you can only, I don't like this metaphor because I'm a vegetarian, but you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. And you're starting, and that's something really powerful.
Professor Hilbin.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's exciting. I would also say congratulations on having not given up. That's the most important thing that I think I can say. And also, I think it's helpful to have like a use for something that you experienced. So sometimes like a brick falls and lands on your foot and then breaks your foot. And then you think like this brick is the most awful thing that could possibly exist, and you like chuck it away over a cliff. And you do want to, of course, be able to move on from the issues that you struggle with, but sometimes the brick can be a positive thing. It can be something that you can use to build something in the future. So I think that sometimes looking backward and thinking like, I just can't imagine why this had to happen to me isn't as helpful as thinking to yourself, like, this terrible thing happened. I'm going through something that's awful and I didn't deserve it. At the same time, like, I'm going to use this to build something powerful in my life. What can I do to, better humanity, better myself? And use this as like a positive thing, like, as hard as that is to do. Like, yes, this happened to me, but it's going to empower me. It's going to make me a better person. It's going to put me in a place where I'm actually able to help other people and myself.
Yeah, no, and I think, yeah, I'm getting a lot of thumbs up here. So that's that. And this next question is to Isabel, again, from one of our listeners here. So like, really, what made you decide to seek help for your mental health? I know you may have covered it a little bit before, but if you want to re-examine that. And like, how has that strength helped you? So what has helped you seek, or what made you decide to seek help for mental health?
Sure. I think going off of Professor Mitchell's point about, you know, reaching a point where you're just constantly spiraling and you just can't get out of it. I felt like I was in one of those water tornadoes that you kind of just get sucked into the bottom and you just can't get out of it. There was a point my second semester of my freshman year where I was receiving grades that I never received in my life. I was getting C's and D's, and my highest grade that semester was a B in introductory course, and I was reaching a point where I didn't know how to get myself out of that state, and I didn't know if I could even continue to progress as a student at Boston College if I continue to be in that state. So it felt like it reached a point where it wasn't an option. I started to not only, you know, sabotage myself when it came to my academics, but I was sabotaging my social life with my anxiety, with my OCD, with all of these thoughts running through my mind at the time. So I think that I was just left at a point where I didn't have a choice, and I mustered up the strength to talk to my parents about it. And honestly, the strength and the resilience that I have been taught through seeking mental health help has made all the difference. Never in a million years when I was a freshman in college did I think I would be someone who, you know, would be able to help someone out in another situation. But during my time at BC, I actually engaged with something called CSERT, which is the Campus Community Emergency Response Team. And part of that training, we go through, you know, just like, you know, different mass casualty incidents, but one of the units and things that we learn are psychological emergencies and how to handle that before a first responder gets on site. And then my junior year, I also decided to pursue the role of becoming a resident assistant or an RA at BC. And in that position, you also are trained to help out with psychological emergencies prior to first responders getting there. So in my time in that role, in both of those roles, I think that being able to give back and help others who may be experiencing a mental health crisis has been very rewarding. And it's also been nice to be able to give back and let those people know that it's going to be okay and get them connected with the resources that I wish I had been connected with earlier.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response, Isabel. Moving on. So this is just a question that has some comments were addressing this, but like given the rise of social media and technology as a whole, like how can young adults set boundaries with social media to protect their mental health?
I think that one of the most powerful things about therapy is the development of the discernment to know when you're not at the place where you're at the bottom, but where you're like actually finding yourself falling, and being able to set the boundary then, because it's very difficult to get yourself out of the pit when you're at the very bottom, which is absolutely possible and is something that all of you will do. And, you know, in the future, though, it's really helpful to like find, you know, yourself falling and be like, okay, so I can get myself back out of this really easily. And so I think with social media, people often try to just like stop using it completely because they go through this oscillation of like, this is really interesting, I'm going to use it, and then like I'm at this like bottom pit, and then I'm going to stop using it, but then they have to start using it again, almost like it's like this great dopamine rush that they get from using it. And I think that just again discussing in therapy like what it feels like inside of your brain, inside of your muscles, and inside of every part of you, that that like is what goes along with the really negative feelings that you get from like having horrible news that you're reading about, from having social interactions that are negative. How does that feel inside of you? And if you can imagine just that feeling to a lower extent, then you can rid yourself of the like need to like keep going with it. So as soon as you start feeling that feeling, try to redirect your thoughts, and going on to something else can be really helpful. In the same way that if a person struggles from having low blood sugar, it's helpful to not, you know, get to the point where you really need that that help, with food and like glucose suddenly. It's like helpful to know when you're actually decreasing in terms of blood glucose level. It's the same with mental health, like to learn to discern whenever you're getting into this place and like falling further away, then you can put the boundary at that point instead of putting it like at a later point.
Yeah. Ditto. Questions like this make me feel very old. Because I'm just like, right. But I love what you said, Professor Hilden, about setting limits and just being awareness of like maintaining awareness when you're starting to fall down the spiral. I also feel like, substance use notwithstanding, like, I'm a big fan of not putting good against perfect. So things like, if you can start to lessen or minimize your social media use, you're in the right direction. But just like, I don't know, like maybe track it or give yourself like, all right, I'm going to give myself 30 minutes to just indulge and then I'm going to put it down, right? Rather than letting it be a constant amorphous blob-like takeover of when you need a quick dopamine hit. Just as a footnote, it is interesting to me to see how like both the benefits, because there are benefits, and some of the frustrations of the sort of online communities around mental illness. Like, I think they're really important. And I think especially as healthcare becomes more inaccessible due to funding restrictions, finding a little bit of diagnostic understanding for what's going on with you can be really helpful regardless of the source. We are dealing a little bit of like, I don't know if it's super helpful for there to be a ton of people saying that they have ADHD. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because it might not be, like, there are a lot of symptoms that look alike across mental health pathologies. So the more I've gotten involved in mental health from this side of it, the more I've come to really be humbled by the fact that it's like, a lot of stuff looks alike, CPTSD has similar symptom pathology as ADHD. So, and the reason why I have some hesitation around those things is just, I think we'd be better off having conversations about priority problems and like issues that people are having than necessarily throwing down diagnostic names when we already know, for example, that the DSM is a little bit of an unstable, like the diagnostic guidelines for the field. We know that it's necessarily unstable because mental health pathology reflects social values, right? So I don't know how much we need to absorb that ourselves for the sake of legitimacy. I hope that at some point we can get to the point of saying like, hey, I get really dysregulated when I'm triggered with stress. Here's how I'm going to handle that, right? Or like, I really like my noise canceling headphones as, like it, just to sort of say like, that's also just good enough, even if you don't have the diagnostic language behind it.
Isabel?
To add on to Professor Mitchell's point, I think that that's really important to understand that there's a lot of different mental health disorders that share very similar characteristics. For example, bipolar disorder and just general depression, major depressive disorder. Both of those disorders have depression as a part of them. And I think it's, again, really important to say things like, I'm feeling overstimulated by this thing, or I'm feeling really down because of XYZ. And I think that really helps to individualize a person's experience with their mental health and not characterize them by a diagnosis as well. And then with the original question about social media, I mean, as someone who, Gen Z, and we were, called screenagers at a certain point, probably still are. But I think that one thing that I really thought of was with the TikTok ban, like a couple of weeks ago, I was impulsively it was like a compulsion. I was just pressing on it and it would pop up and I'd be like, oh, I forgot. And then swipe out. And then 30 seconds later, I would just press on it again. And I feel like social media is just so integrated into our generation and how we are, that to the point that Professor Hilbin made, it's not something that I feel like our generation can just detach from completely or do like a social media detox, because we end up going right back into it and then we end up back into that cycle where we delete it and we re-download it. And I've seen so many friends of mine go through this where they're doing a cleanse from Instagram and then end up downloading it again. And I think what's important in these situations is utilizing the resources not only that you have on your phone. I mean, iPhones have the capability to have a specific amount of time that you could use on an app per day. If you know that if you start doom scrolling and you start ending up in some certain thread that you don't want to end up in, that's something where you could then disable the app on your phone. Another thing is just having that self-control and that self-awareness to stop and acknowledge when something, might not be great to see. I remember when I was still waiting on graduate school decisions and even something like LinkedIn, I was scrolling through and seeing all of my peers posting that they got into this dental school and that medical school and this PhD program. And all I could do was sit there and compare myself and feel terrible about myself because I was just waiting to hear back. And that's, again, with those anxieties and thinking the worst case scenario of, what if I don't get into a graduate program and all of my peers and classmates that, I was in the same classes with, same study groups in, I might not end up somewhere good. And that's when I had to acknowledge, I'll have LinkedIn on my phone. It'll be fine. I can be happy for people, but also acknowledge that this is something that's kind of stressing me out. And for right now, I'm going to take a little bit of time away.
Yeah, wonderful insights and perspectives from each side of the aisle here. I think it was really useful. And this is just kind of the last question to kind of cap off our conversation tonight. So to all of you, like, how can young adults recognize when they need help with mental health? And on a similar note, what should someone do if they're worried about a friend's mental well-being?
You can go ahead.
Do it.
I think that definitely, I'll start with the knowing how to get help for a friend. And I think that a lot of the time in different trainings I've gotten, and, I've always just been told, reach out to them, let them know that there's resources, or it's just a little bit too straightforward, at least personally, where you might go up to a friend and just, I don't know, some of these trainings, it's just you go up to them and ask, are you struggling with mental health? But I think that especially with a friend or someone that you're concerned about, if you are genuinely concerned about them, I think that it comes naturally when you want to go and talk to them and genuinely want the best for them. And I think that can be as simple as sending a text to a friend saying, hey, I noticed you've been down lately. Do you want to grab dinner soon? Just to maybe get them out of this feeling that they're having, or if they're isolating themselves, trying to get them out of that isolation and open up the conversation to, is seeking help something that you're interested in, or do you feel like you may be at a point where you want to seek help yourself? I you can't force anyone to do anything that they don't want to do, unless, I guess, depending on the state. I'm not a professional in this, but unless they're a harm to themselves or others. But I think just really being just a genuine friend and showing care will be enough for that person to understand that you are there for them, you are looking out for their best interests. And then in regards to acknowledging yourself when you may need help, I think it's just important to be self-aware, and sometimes that can be difficult when you're kind of slowly slipping into difficulties with your mental health. But I think that there could always be maybe a moment, or maybe just taking moments of self-reflection. I've recently been into journaling a lot, and just kind of reflecting back on maybe, a few months ago or however long ago in your life, and evaluating how things were then and then seeing how things are now, not only, with your life in general, but also with yourself. How do you feel about yourself? How has it been getting out of bed in the morning? Have you been noticing that you've been hanging out with friends more or less? If you're hanging out with them less, is it because, work's been ramped up and it's a time thing, or is your schedule exactly the same and it seems like there might be another underlying issue to that? So I think that self-reflection is really important, whether you are having, suffering from a mental health condition, or experiencing a symptom of, kind of having a dip in your mental health. I think it's just an important way to, keep track of yourself and make sure that you're doing okay, because that's very important.
I think something that happens when a person is struggling and maybe needs to know that they're struggling, you had asked how a person knows whenever they're suffering from poor mental health, is that like an individual starts to compare themselves to another person or to other people. You start to think to yourself, like, why am I not able to do what other people are able to do? What is wrong with me? And those thoughts, if you just start to notice that those thoughts are happening, then it's probably indication that something has gone awry, and it's really imperative to seek help for that mental health issue. If a friend you discern is having a mental health issue, I think the common question of what can I do that can be of service to you? What can I do to help? Like, what would be something that would be calming for you is really helpful. As long as you are making sure that you're doing that in a methodological like way, to make sure that like the person knows that you're actually wanting to know the answer. And I think that in stopping to make sure the person really knows that you want to know the answer, you're also enabling them to think about what I said before about like the forward-looking process. Like, what is it that could help you? So if a person is considering like, what it is that could possibly be helpful for them, then their brain is functioning in a way that's causing them to think about the future, and also will be elucidating what it is that might be able to be helpful for them.
So I think Isabel, did I get frozen making a weird face?
It was like a millisecond, but you're all good.
Okay. So Isabel, I think what you just said about just like self-awareness, that's really useful. And it's interesting. I want to, just as like a meta comment, I keep mentioning methods from cognitive behavioral therapy tonight. That's like the peek behind the black curtain. And interestingly, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with CBT, but I think when you're just trying to, I'm like, for myself, I'm like, I just really like existential stuff. So I'm like psychodynamic therapy all the way. But
Me too.
yeah. We'll hang out, Professor
Yes.
Hilden. But when you're starting that initial process of like, what am I like when things aren't going well? CBT is actually super useful. So I think if one knows that one is prone to certain changes in mood, or that things aren't going well, be really mindful, not just of how you're feeling, because kind of like what Isabel described, you're not always going to be super self-aware at first until you're pretty deep in. It's sort of like your eyes adjusting to being in a dark room, right? You might not know that the room got darker until all of a sudden you step out of it. But just know what your life starts to look like when you're not doing well. So do you lose your appetite? Do you, like, as viewers can see, I'm not at a baseline the neatest person, but I'm not usually a complete slob. I know that when things aren't going well for me, oh boy, we get like, I just don't have the will, right? And that's been a thing that, an external thing that when I notice that's happening, I'm like, all right, we're not doing so hot right now. Right. So things like that. And everybody has their list of things that start to slip when they're not at their best. So being really mindful of noticing those and asking other people to notice them for you too. Right. Hey, I noticed that you've seemed really withdrawn. I noticed that you're not really eating. I noticed that you've been using alcohol more than you usually do. You okay? Right. And one of them, and in terms of caring for other people, and this goes for therapists as well as friends, and I think Professor Hilbin, I imagine you've also had to reckon with this surrender professionally. You can't fix things, right? If you go in trying to fix and give suggestions and be like, do this, this, and this to a mental health crisis, it's not, that road leads to further madness, right? But going in with genuine curiosity and compassion and care and good boundaries, like if you're supporting somebody who you do feel could be gently redirected in some way, right? Like, hey, I'm hearing you say that no one loves you, but I'm been sitting here with you for the last 4 hours tonight. So just not in a defensive way, but just to say like, hey, maybe that's not reflective of reality because I'm one of your 4 friends who wanted to come. You know, things like that can also help tip the balance, but going in with the urge to fix or correct or be irritated with somebody for not doing the right things isn't going to be so helpful. And if somebody has gone through a crisis in their early kind of like first couple of days out of the hospital, a nice thing that I always like to encourage is like a daily feelings check-in with whoever it is knows that that person was impatient. Like everybody says their feelings, not just the person who went through it. Normalize sharing your feelings, right? Even if it's a 1 to 10 scale. If you do it every day, it now becomes a habit and it's easier to ask for the help when you need it.
All right. So thank you all. This concludes our first mental health wellness webinar titled Mind Matters. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We hope these insights were very useful, and we look forward to seeing you guys and everyone at our next mental health wellness webinar, which will happen sometime over the summer. Thank you all and have a nice and wonderful evening.